This movie is based on a true story. If you've been having a tough time in the past couple of years, it might be worth watching. Many people have been inspired by it. The story takes place in the 1930s, during the Great Depression in the United States, where layoffs and unemployment were prevalent. The protagonist is a real-life boxer. This man, in a bit of a daze, at 4 a.m., puts in a false tooth. Perhaps his real teeth were knocked out by an opponent. Jim Braddock was once a boxing prodigy, known as the Bull of Bergen. But the Great Depression turned him into a loser, only able to squeeze into the slums with his children. The family couldn't make ends meet anymore, couldn't afford milk, so they had to dilute it with water for the children to drink. He gave the food to his youngest daughter, then kissed his wife's forehead, put on his coat, and hurried out the door. But he wasn't going to train. He was going to the docks to compete for casual labor. As soon as the foreman appeared, everyone rushed forward. They were all desperate men, eagerly seeking a chance for casual work. But the dock economy was also depressed, and today only 9 casual workers were needed. The foreman randomly selected a few lucky men, and tonight their children would have enough to eat. Unfortunately, Jim Braddock wasn't so lucky. He could only return home disappointed. Back home, he found his eldest son had stolen a large sausage, which could have fed them for a few days. Without hesitation, Jim Braddock had his son return the sausage to the butcher's shop. He told his son that no matter how hard life gets, they must not steal, and promised his son that he would find a way to get food. Despite his right hand still fractured, he came to the arena because in this match, regardless of winning or losing, as long as he fought, he would receive a reward to alleviate the urgent need for food. However, the fight was extremely ugly. Jim Braddock always relied on his right fist, but this time, in a habitual move, his right hand broke again. In the following rounds, his left fist was weak and feeble. Without any highlights, the audience booed. Popcorn and newspapers were thrown all over the arena, and the match had to be suspended and declared invalid. The bigger disaster came after the match. The Boxing Association not only refused to pay him, but also revoked his boxing license. He lowered his head and pleaded with the association president, but no one sympathized with the weak. He could no longer fight in full matches and lost the means to support his family. Jim Braddock, in despair, returned home and apologized sorrowfully to his wife, who gave him a warm hug. But as the pillar of the family, without money, they couldn't pay the utility bills or buy groceries. Jim Braddock had to ask his wife for help, and he applied shoe polish to his cast so that others wouldn't see his injury while he worked casual jobs. Not long after, the electrician cut off their electricity because he couldn't afford to pay the bill with his meager income. Without electricity, they could only use candles. Without gas, they had to dismantle discarded fences for firewood to keep warm. Despite this, the children still caught colds. Unable to bear it any longer, his wife climbed outside to release her emotions, not wanting the children to see her sadness. But now, Jim Braddock had no money to take the children to the doctor. If a man couldn't protect his family, how could he face himself? The usually proud Jim Braddock set aside his dignity. He received $19 at the relief center. The staff said they never expected to see Jim Braddock there, but even a hero could be defeated by a single cent. $19 was still not enough to cover the fees. Walking down the street, he saw poor children fetching water from fire hydrants and rich children holding giant lollipops. This man, beaten down by life, finally understood that the dignity of the weak was worthless. He went to the Boxing Association and faced the bosses who had fired him, telling them about his plight. He awkwardly took off his hat and begged them for some money so his children wouldn't freeze. After hearing his story, many people took out their spare change and put it into his hat, while some gloated and refused to give anything. The once mighty boxer had now become a beggar. He went to his old partner, tears in his eyes. A man can cry, can suffer, can lose face, but he cannot fail his wife and children. He was afraid to look directly at his former partner, who asked him how much he was missing, and then made up the electricity bill for him. At last we have electricity in the house, and the children are no longer freezing. 1 year later, Jim Braddock's old partner suddenly found him and brought him a boxing match opportunity. Jim Braddock mentioned that his license had been revoked, but his old partner explained that he wasn't being asked to return to boxing. He was just needed to replace someone else in the ring, essentially becoming a punching bag. Before his old partner could reveal who the opponent was, Jim Braddock immediately agreed upon hearing there was payment involved. He hugged his partner tightly. This money was crucial for him. Despite knowing the life-threatening risks, he was determined to proceed. As the match was about to begin, Jim Braddock's stomach grumbled loudly. Turns out Jim Braddock didn't get his morning relief soup, so he hasn't eaten all day. His partner panicked upon hearing this. Realizing Jim Braddock couldn't fight without eating, he brought a bowl of mashed potatoes, but without spoons and to avoid getting the bandages dirty. Jim Braddock, seeing no one around, dove in headfirst. Just then, a reporter from a newspaper arrived and mocked the former bull of Bergen, asking if he could embarrass himself any further. Jim Braddock remained silent, and just as he began to eat, it was time to enter the ring. Jim Braddock then learned that his opponent was the world's second-ranked heavyweight boxer. The opponent was muscular and intimidating, eyeing Jim Braddock like a wolf eyes its prey because he had never tasted defeat in over 80 matches. The radio began broadcasting the showdown between the wolf and the lamb. Jim Braddock's co-workers, upon hearing it was him, gathered around to listen. Facing a formidable opponent, Jim Braddock appeared calm. After all, for someone who had already lost everything, what else was there to lose? Having not been in the ring for a year, Jim Braddock looked around the audience, thinking of his past. He knew this was a chance given to him by fate. As the match began, punches were thrown, and the opponent's heavy blows came like the roar of a tiger. The commentator asserted that Jim Braddock wouldn't last 2 rounds. Sure enough, before 30 seconds had passed, Jim Braddock was knocked down by a heavy blow. Now, all he has to do is lie still and wait for the referee to count, and he'll get paid. But he knows this is a chance. He smiles, and a strange force makes him get up. The workers at the radio were cheering him on as he stood up and started to fight back, thundering combinations into his opponent's face. In the second round, the fists come down like hammers, but Jim Braddock withstands the attacks. His co-workers listening to the broadcast are incredibly tense. Finally, Jim Braddock makes it to the third round, where the opponent comes at him with heavy blows, and Jim Braddock can only defend. But he becomes more courageous as the fight progresses, and the audience cheers. They seem to sense that the former bull of Bergen has returned. With a left punch followed by a right hook, Jim Braddock, who hasn't eaten all day, knocks his opponent down with just 2 punches. Everyone cheers for this man. When he stands up, Jim Braddock stares at his opponent intently. From this moment on, he is going to fight back. His fists are like a storm, unleashing his unwillingness to accept fate, his promise to his family, and his longing for opportunities, all on his opponent. He launches a counterattack on life, and the whole arena is shouting. His old partner is extremely excited. The referee has to pull Jim Braddock away. At this moment, his opponent is already lying on the ground. The commentator shouts wildly. It's rare for Jim Braddock to knock him down in just 3 rounds. As soon as the match ends, Jim Braddock starts eating like crazy. He is just too hungry. His old partner asks why his left hand is so powerful. Turns out Jim Braddock had an injury to his right hand when he was doing hard labor, so he built up his left hand to be stronger. Before Jim Braddock can wipe his mouth, reporters swarm in, snapping pictures of him. When Jim Braddock returns home, his children are waiting in a row. When they hear that Jim Braddock has won, they rush towards him. The dim and dilapidated house is once again full of life, and they can finally eat a full meal. The next morning, Jim Braddock went back to his casual work. The foreman looked at him and chose him. It turns out the foreman had also listened to his match and admired him greatly. Ask Jim Braddock why he's still coming to work, and Jim Braddock says that paying off his debt will leave him with only $5. The foreman laughed and said, "Then you're the richest man in the place too. At least you're out of debt." Jim Braddock laughed and went to work. Before long, the association approached him again. Life's second chance had truly arrived, but his wife was not happy, and she was more concerned about Jim Braddock's health. He found Jim Braddock's old partner, who was reluctant to open the door. It turned out his luxurious apartment was now empty. He had sold all his belongings but didn't want to open the door out of pride. In tough economic times, who could escape unscathed? The old partner explained that he had bet his entire fortune on supporting Jim Braddock's rise, and this was Jim Braddock's chance to rise again. His wife reluctantly agreed, and so, Jim Braddock began his training. Despite not training for a year, Jim Braddock was determined to go the distance. One match after another followed, and his opponents were tall and powerful, but Jim Braddock was more resilient than ever. If life couldn't knock him down, they certainly couldn't. However, Jim Braddock also suffered serious injuries. Match after match, victory after victory, Jim Braddock, who had emerged from the depths of despair, had become a warrior in everyone's eyes. One day, Jim Braddock went to the relief center. Everyone looked at him. It turned out Jim Braddock wasn't there to collect money. He was there to repay the relief fund. He returned all the money he had previously received. Of course, Jim Braddock was also romantic. With a stable financial foundation, he would occasionally buy his wife a bouquet of flowers. Jim Braddock's story attracted more and more media attention, and people fell in love with him. This middle-aged bull of Bergen who had risen from the ashes had become the spiritual leader of the Great Depression era.
I know that these days not everybody gets a second chance.
But his next opponent was the world champion, Mike Wilson, a ruthless and brutal fighter who had killed several opponents in the ring. Autopsies showed that the victims all suffered from brain tissue detachment, indicating the ferocity of Mike Wilson's punches. Jim Braddock watched footage of Mike Wilson, and his face twitched involuntarily. The association advised Jim Braddock to consider carefully whether to fight. Some media even proclaimed that if Jim Braddock accepted the challenge, it would be tantamount to suicide. The two met head-on, and Mike Wilson threatened to kill Jim Braddock and take over his wife and children, a tactic he often used to intimidate opponents. Jim Braddock, however, was not intimidated, but his wife was. While playing boxing games with the children at home, she scolded them, but she was actually furious with her husband. She was angry at him for agreeing to a match with such a high risk of death, and she was on the verge of collapse. Before Jim Braddock left, his co-workers looked at this brave man. He bid farewell to his wife and children, and everyone's face was filled with sorrow, as if it were a farewell to life. As Jim Braddock sat in the car, crowds along the road cheered for him. Just as he left, his wife went to the church to pray. She did not expect the church to be packed. Everyone was praying for her husband. Jim Braddock had already become a hero in people's hearts, and his fight seemed to be for everyone. She would wholeheartedly support her husband. In the end, tears filled her eyes. She loved him so much, but she also had to fulfill his wish. She asked Jim Braddock to return safely. In the church, in the small taverns, on the streets, everyone crowded around the radio to listen to the broadcast of the match. At the venue, 40,000 people witnessed the match. As Jim Braddock entered, the 40,000-strong crowd fell silent, showing their respect for him. When he stepped onto the ring, someone shouted from the audience, "Go in, Jimmy!" And the whole arena erupted, with 40,000 people shouting at the same time, the deafening sound seeming to shatter the shackles of fate. Hearing the thunderous roar, Mike Wilson's face changed in fear. As the first round began, Mike Wilson, with his long arms and legs and towering stature, kept pressing down on Jim Braddock's head, as if playing with him. He would also laugh while hitting, using this arrogance to intimidate Jim Braddock. Jim Braddock, skilled in close combat, couldn't gain any advantage. Luckily, he held on until the end of the round. In the second round, Mike Wilson continued to push Jim Braddock away, and when Jim Braddock attacked, he began to evade, wearing out Jim Braddock's stamina. Due to his youth, he had the advantage of stamina. He waited until he forced Jim Braddock into a corner before he began to unleash a furious assault. After the third round, he found Jim Braddock's old injury and started pounding his ribs with heavy punches, causing Jim Braddock unbearable pain. In the next round, Mike Wilson became even more shameless. Even after the referee called for a stop, he tried to sneak in a cheap shot. While the two were grappling, he would lean in and mention Jim Braddock's wife, trying to mess with Jim Braddock's mind. The more he provoked Jim Braddock, the more Jim Braddock fought back, causing Mike Wilson great discomfort. In this round, Mike Wilson's ferocity was fully revealed. He prepared to take down Jim Braddock in one fell swoop, launching a full-scale barrage on Jim Braddock, who struggled to endure, his face swollen and bruised. Everyone was tense for Jim Braddock. The drawbacks of his age began to show. After taking several heavy blows, he was starting to struggle a bit, but he did not lose his composure. Life's hardships had not defeated him, so how could he succumb to the likes of Mike Wilson? A series of heavy counterattacks caught Mike Wilson off guard. His smirk turned into a grimace. It became a battle of endurance, resilience, and above all, a struggle against fate. Mike Wilson was bewildered by Jim Braddock's resilience. He was taken aback and suddenly threw a low blow, causing Jim Braddock intense pain. Everyone scorned this despicable act, and he lost points because of it. In the final round, his partner told Jim Braddock that as long as he stayed away from Mike Wilson and dragged the fight to the end, he would win because Mike Wilson surely wanted to knock out Jim Braddock. The ultimate showdown began, and Jim Braddock faced Mike Wilson head-on. He didn't shy away from the oppression of life he had endured for so many years. Now, he was ready to confront it head-on. However, facing Mike Wilson directly did not give him the upper hand. From the audience in the arena to the neutral announcers, from Jim Braddock's wife to the people listening by the radio, everyone was concerned about Jim Braddock, because in their hearts, Jim Braddock was not allowed to fall. Suddenly, Mike Wilson lifted Jim Braddock's head and delivered a powerful blow to his face. Jim Braddock was sent flying to the edge of the ring. Everyone was extremely tense, and they all stood up nervously. Jim Braddock's vision was blurry. He recalled the replays of Mike Wilson's matches. Mike Wilson would always knock out his opponents with one punch at this moment. He couldn't afford to go down. When Mike Wilson's blow came back, Jim Braddock dodged the attack and began to counterattack. This warrior became even more fierce, his punches landing on Mike Wilson's head like thunder. The audience in the arena went crazy. They jumped down from their seats and rushed towards the center, surrounding the ring, shouting desperately for this warrior who fought more and more bravely. At this point, both boxers were almost exhausted. It was now a test of endurance. The punches they landed on each other numbered in the hundreds. Until the end, Mike Wilson's punches were weak and feeble, while Jim Braddock's were still powerful and fierce. Just then, the match ended. Mike Wilson saved his skin, but based on the score, Jim Braddock overwhelmingly took over Mike Wilson's throne. In that era of depression and decline, the Cinderella of the boxing world who emerged from the slums, climbed to the top of the boxing world. This is a true story from 1935. He inspired many people's hearts and later bought the dock where he had worked during the Great Depression. In 1960, he participated in the construction of a bridge. He lived out his later years in comfort with his wife, using the prize money from his matches. A real man should be strong yet gentle, brave and upright, unyielding in the face of fate, unchanged by the vicissitudes of life, and true to himself despite the ravages of time. If you liked this story, please share it with more people. I am a movie enthusiast. Welcome to subscribe to my channel. See you next time.